You ever hear a woman try to argue with a convoy of emergency school buses while flood sirens are screaming in the background? Because I did. And about 20 minutes later, the National Guard landed helicopters on her precious HOA golf course. The smell hit me first. Diesel exhaust, muddy floodwater, and that sharp electrical scent you get before a transformer blows somewhere nearby. Rain hammered the windshield hard enough to blur the flashing red lights ahead of me into long streaks across the glass. I gripped the steering wheel tighter and watched Bus 14 fishtail slightly as it rolled to a stop behind the locked gates of Willow Creek Estates. 35 elementary school kids sat trapped inside those buses while toxic runoff water crawled across the road inch by inch like a living thing. And standing under the stone entrance arch in a white raincoat that probably cost more than my first truck was Brenda Whitmore, HOA president, self-appointed queen of suburban perfection. She had one hand wrapped around her phone, live streaming the entire thing to half the county, and the other pointed directly at the bus drivers like she was commanding a military blockade. "You are not bringing those vehicles into this community," she yelled over the storm. "Those roads are private property." One of the drivers leaned out his window, soaked from the rain. "Ma'am, these are evacuated kids." Brenda didn't even blink. "Then reroute them." The metallic groan of the locked security gate echoed through the flooded entrance while children pressed frightened faces against fogged-up bus windows. I could hear crying even through the rain. Small hands against glass. Teachers trying to calm panic. Somewhere behind the buses, another siren started wailing. Closer this time. Faster. My boots splashed into ankle-deep water as I stepped out of my county SUV. Cold rain hit my face sideways with the force of gravel. Brenda turned the second she saw me approaching. Her expression tightened immediately, like she'd smelled something unpleasant. "Oh great," she snapped. "Now the county's here to make this worse." The floodwater swirled around my boots while I held up my emergency access badge. "Brenda, open the gate. Right now." She laughed. Actually laughed. Even with children stranded behind her barricade and storm water rising across the roadway. Her phone camera tilted toward me. "This man wants to destroy our community roads with diesel buses during an active weather emergency," she announced dramatically to her live stream viewers. "You're obstructing an active evacuation route," I said calmly. "Those kids need immediate transport clearance." The wind whipped rain across her face, but she stood there smiling like she was winning an argument at an HOA board meeting instead of blocking emergency vehicles during a county disaster declaration. "These roads belong to Willow Creek Estates," she said. "You don't outrank this HOA." Somewhere far above the storm, I heard it. Deep, heavy, rhythmic. The unmistakable thump of helicopter rotors cutting through rain clouds. Brenda kept talking, but I stopped listening. Because I already knew what was coming over those trees. And she didn't. Most people think emergency management is sirens and helicopters and dramatic rescues on the evening news. Truth is, most of it happens in quiet rooms that smell like burnt coffee and printer toner while exhausted people stare at weather maps at 3 in the morning. That had been my life for the last 4 years. Before that, I spent 12 years in the Army moving fuel convoys through flood zones and coordinating evacuation routes in places most Americans could not find on a map. Afghanistan taught me something important about disasters. Water does not care about money, or gated communities, or neighborhood rules printed on decorative signs. When floodwater starts moving, everybody answers to it eventually. I bought my house in Willow Creek Estates because of my daughter Ava. She was 11, obsessed with astronomy, and convinced our backyard was the perfect place to watch meteor showers. The neighborhood looked safe when we moved in. Tree-lined streets, clean sidewalks, expensive stone entrances with fake gas lanterns flickering at night. The kind of place where people waved politely while judging each other through kitchen windows. Ava loved it immediately, said it smelled like fresh grass and rain after we unpacked the moving truck. I remember standing in the driveway that first night listening to cicadas humming through the warm Texas air while she dragged cardboard boxes inside, wearing my old Army flashlight clipped to her belt. For a while, I thought maybe we had finally found peace. Then Brenda Whitmore introduced herself. She arrived in a white Lexus sport utility vehicle with custom HOA plates and a smile sharp enough to cut rope. I was still assembling patio furniture when she walked across my lawn holding a clipboard against her chest like a badge. "Welcome to Willow Creek Estates," she said sweetly. although her eyes were already scanning my garage shelves. We have very strict community standards here. The smell of fresh-cut cedar from the fence installation still hung in the air while she pointed out violations before I had even finished moving in. Trash bins visible from the street. Work boots left on the porch. County emergency decals on my SUV apparently damaged neighborhood aesthetics. Ava asked later why the lady sounded angry, even while smiling. I did not have a good answer for her. Brenda treated the neighborhood like her private kingdom. Utility trucks annoyed her. School traffic annoyed her. Delivery vans annoyed her. Anything that reminded her actual working people existed beyond the gates seemed to personally offend her. She once tried filing a complaint because a city maintenance crew parked near the entrance during a thunderstorm. Another time she argued with firefighters for leaving tire marks near the community fountain after responding to a kitchen fire. I watched her stand in 6-inch rainwater wearing designer rain boots while lecturing exhausted emergency workers about landscaping damage. The woman had no concept of priorities beyond appearances. About a year after we moved in, the county hired me to redesign emergency evacuation routes after a refinery leak outside Beaumont trapped 3 school districts during a storm surge. Spent months reviewing flood maps, bridge weights, bus clearance routes, and emergency corridor access points. Every major subdivision had to cooperate, including Willow Creek Estates. I still remember sitting in a fluorescent-lit county office while rain hammered the windows as I signed the final corridor authorization package. One particular route stood out because it shaved nearly 14 minutes off elementary evacuation times during flood conditions. Straight through Brenda's precious gated neighborhood. State Emergency Easement Authority approved the corridor immediately. Brenda fought it for 3 straight months. She lost every time. And standing there now in rising floodwater, while helicopter rotors echoed somewhere above the storm, I realized she still had not accepted that loss. The storm got worse fast. Texas weather does that sometimes. One minute it feels like heavy rain. The next minute the entire sky sounds like it is tearing apart above your head. Water surged over the curbs in thick brown waves carrying branches, trash cans, and somebody's patio furniture straight down Willow Creek Boulevard. Buses stayed trapped outside the gates while windshield wipers fought a losing battle against sheets of rain pounding the glass. I could see little faces inside Bus 14 staring out through fogged windows. One girl pressed a stuffed rabbit against the glass while her teacher tried to calm the kids with forced smiles that looked thinner every second. The air smelled like wet asphalt, diesel smoke, and that sour chemical odor drifting from the overturned tanker near the elementary school. Every emergency radio in my SUV crackled nonstop now. Flood advisories, road closures, hazard containment updates. Somewhere behind us, another siren screamed through the storm before fading into the distance. Brenda stood under the covered guard station completely dry while everyone else got soaked. She kept live streaming with one hand and clutching her designer umbrella with the other like she was hosting some kind of neighborhood social event instead of blocking an evacuation route. The county had plenty of warning about this storm, she announced to her viewers. This community should not suffer because of poor planning. The unbelievable part was that some residents actually stood behind her nodding along. I recognized half of them from HOA meetings. People more concerned about landscaping stones and property values than the fact that elementary school kids were sitting in contaminated floodwater less than 50 yards away. A loud metallic cough echoed from the second bus in line. Then the engine died completely. The headlights flickered once before fading dim against the rain. One of the drivers slammed both palms against the steering wheel. No, no, no. Water had already reached halfway up the tires. The smell of overheated electrical wiring drifted through the storm. That got everybody's attention fast. Parents started arriving at the outer barricades in pickup trucks and sport utility vehicles after hearing about the evacuation delay online. Tires hissed through standing water while panicked mothers and fathers jumped out shouting their children's names toward the buses. The sound rolled through the storm like static. Fear has a very specific tone when it comes from parents. Sharp, desperate, animal. Deputy Harris tried controlling the crowd near the entrance, rain dripping off the brim of his sheriff hat. Everybody stay back. We are handling this. Brenda immediately turned her camera toward him. This deputy is threatening residents for protecting private property, she said dramatically. Harris looked exhausted. Mud streaked his pants up to the knees, and rainwater poured off his jacket sleeves while he stared at Brenda like he could not believe this was actually happening. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "state emergency protocols override HOA access restrictions during declared evacuation events." Thinking about her classroom, her little blue backpack hanging beside her desk, the astronomy stickers she covered everything with. The knot in my stomach tightened every time another emergency update crackled through the radio. Then my county dispatcher's voice finally cut through the static. "Walker, State Command approved escalation authority. National Guard units are inbound now. Estimated arrival, 8 minutes." I looked up slowly toward the sound growing louder above the storm. The helicopters were close enough now to shake rainwater loose from the oak trees lining the subdivision entrance. Brenda heard it too. Her smile faded for the first time all night. The first helicopter broke through the clouds like thunder with headlights attached. Rain spiraled violently beneath the rotors as the aircraft banked low over Willow Creek estates, rattling windows and shaking water off rooftops across the subdivision. Every person standing near the gates looked up at the same time. The sound swallowed everything else. Sirens, rain, shouting parents. All of it disappeared beneath the deep mechanical roar echoing through the storm. Brenda lowered her phone slowly, blinking against the wind blasting through the entrance road. Her perfectly styled hair whipped loose instantly under the rotor wash. "What is this?" she shouted, though nobody could hear much over the helicopters. Two matte green National Guard transport trucks rolled up behind the buses, tires pushing floodwater aside in heavy waves. Amber emergency lights flashed against the rain-soaked stone walls of the subdivision entrance. The trucks looked enormous compared to the polished luxury vehicles parked behind the gates. Mud splashed across decorative landscaping Brenda had spent 2 years obsessing over during HOA meetings. Honestly, that part almost made me smile. Sergeant Cole Mercer stepped down from the lead transport vehicle wearing soaked camouflage and carrying a waterproof command tablet under one arm. I had worked with Mercer twice during hurricane evacuations down near Galveston. Calm guy, former combat engineer. The kind of man who spoke quietly enough that people usually stopped yelling just to hear him. Rainwater dripped from the brim of his patrol cap as he walked toward the locked gates. "Who is responsible for denying emergency access?" he asked. Brenda stepped forward immediately. "I am president of this homeowners association," she snapped. "And nobody authorized military entry into this neighborhood." Mercer stared at her for about 2 seconds. Then he glanced toward the stranded buses. One child inside bus 14 waved nervously through the fogged-up glass, while a teacher held a flashlight near the aisle because the interior lights had started flickering. The smell of overheated engines mixed with wet mulch and stormwater all around us. Mercer looked back at Brenda. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "governor-authorized disaster response overrides residential access restrictions under Texas Emergency Code." Brenda folded her arms tighter. "These roads are private." The rain hammered harder against the pavement. Water now rushed over the curb near the entrance fast enough to carry loose gravel down the roadway. Somewhere deeper inside the neighborhood, a transformer popped with a bright blue flash. Half the streetlights inside Willow Creek Estates instantly died, leaving sections of the subdivision swallowed in darkness. Residents standing near the clubhouse started murmuring nervously. Fear finally began spreading through the people who had supported Brenda 15 minutes earlier. Funny how quickly neighborhood politics disappear once the lights go out. Deputy Harris moved beside me while wiping rainwater from his face. "You seeing this?" he muttered. I nodded toward the darkened subdivision streets. "The drainage channels are backing up." Harris looked toward the buses. "Kids cannot sit there much longer." He was right. Bus 14 leaned slightly toward the flooded curb now. Water swirled around the wheel wells while exhausted drivers checked mirrors every few seconds. Parents outside the barricade kept shouting for updates. One woman broke down crying when she spotted her son waving through a rain-streaked window. Through all of it, Brenda still refused to move. She pointed directly at Sergeant Mercer. "People are destroying private property. I will sue every single one of you." Mercer did not even react. He simply opened the waterproof tablet and turned the screen toward her. "State Emergency Corridor Authorization. Signed and approved 3 years earlier." My signature sat at the bottom beside the county seal. Brenda's face changed immediately. Not panic yet. Worse, realization. The kind that crawls slowly across somebody's expression when they finally understand the situation stopped being about them a long time ago. You could actually watch the moment Brenda realized the paperwork had beaten her. Her eyes locked onto the county seal on Mercer's tablet, while rainwater dripped from the edge of her umbrella in steady streams. The livestream phone hanging loosely in her hand kept recording everything. Thousands of people were probably watching by then. Parents, residents, half the county emergency network. And there she stood in soaked designer boots arguing with the National Guard while school buses sat stranded in floodwater behind her gates. The helicopters circled lower overhead, their searchlights cutting white beams through the rain like giant moving blades. Water rippled violently across the flooded roadway every time the rotor wash swept overhead. The whole entrance to Willow Creek Estates looked different now. Smaller somehow. Less powerful. Those decorative stone walls and polished iron gates suddenly looked ridiculous beside military transport trucks and emergency crews carrying rescue gear through waist-deep rain. Sergeant Mercer handed the tablet back to one of his operators and looked calmly toward the locked entrance. "Final request, ma'am. Unlock the gate." Brenda swallowed hard, but kept forcing confidence into her voice. This community board was never properly notified about any easement authorization. I almost laughed at that one. 3 years earlier, she had attended every single county hearing personally. She showed up wearing pastel business suits and carrying binders full of property value projections, trying to block emergency corridor approval. She argued school buses caused road wear, claimed emergency traffic would lower luxury home resale numbers. At one hearing, she spent 20 straight minutes complaining that utility vehicles created visual disruption for residents enjoying outdoor recreation spaces. The woman actually said that during hurricane preparedness discussions. I remember county engineers staring at her like they could not decide whether she was serious or deeply insane. Mercer did not bother arguing. He simply nodded once toward the military police officer standing near the trucks. "Begin emergency access procedure." Brenda's expression cracked instantly. "You cannot do that." But the officer was already moving toward the gate control box mounted beside the guard station. Deputy Harris stepped closer to the crowd of residents gathering behind Brenda while trying to keep people back from the flooded roadway. More subdivision lights flickered out in the distance. Rainwater now rushed down the entrance boulevard fast enough to carry mulch and broken tree limbs straight past the guard station. Somewhere deeper inside the neighborhood, a car alarm started wailing nonstop beneath the storm. The smell of wet electrical wiring drifted through the humid air again. Then came the sound. Metallic. Sharp. Hydraulic cutters engaging against the reinforced gate lock. Sparks flashed briefly against the rain before disappearing beneath the floodwater. The massive iron gates finally jerked loose with a deep mechanical groan that echoed through the subdivision entrance louder than the thunder overhead. Parents outside the barricades actually cheered. I watched one exhausted bus driver close his eyes in relief while gripping the steering wheel with both hands. Teachers inside the buses started calming the children immediately, pointing toward the opening gates while flashlight beams bounced through the dark interiors. Brenda stepped directly in front of the opening entrance with both arms spread wide. "You are trespassing on private property," she shouted at Mercer over the storm. "I will personally make sure every one of you loses your jobs." Mercer looked at her the same way a firefighter might look at somebody yelling about carpet stains while the house is flooding. Calm, tired, completely unimpressed. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "children were trapped because of your decisions tonight." Even through the rain and helicopter noise, the sentence hit hard enough to silence everybody nearby for a second. Then the convoy started moving. Engines rumbled forward through rising floodwater, while emergency lights painted red and amber reflections across the soaked stone entrance walls. Bus 14 rolled through the open gates first, tires cutting deep waves through the flooded roadway. Caught sight of the little girl with the stuffed rabbit again. This time she smiled weakly through the fogged glass, while her teacher held onto the overhead rail to keep balance. And standing there beside the ruined gate with rain running down her face and livestream still recording every second, Brenda finally looked exactly what she really was. Not powerful, not important. Just one terrified woman realizing the entire country had watched her choose property rules over stranded children. Once the buses started rolling through the subdivision, the entire atmosphere changed. fear moved faster than floodwater in neighborhoods like Willow Creek Estates. Residents who had been standing behind Brenda 30 minutes earlier suddenly disappeared back inside their oversized houses with the lights off and curtains cracked open just enough to watch from a safe distance. Nobody wanted to stand too close to the woman arguing with the National Guard anymore. The rain kept falling hard enough to sting my face while convoy headlights reflected across the flooded streets like moving rivers of gold and red. National Guard engineers spread through the neighborhood quickly, checking drainage routes and guiding buses away from submerged intersections. The smell of soaked pine mulch and diesel exhaust hung heavy in the humid night air. Every few seconds, another burst of static crackled through emergency radios clipped to rain-soaked uniforms. Ava's school buses finally entered the subdivision from the north side convoy route about 10 minutes later. I spotted the familiar district number painted across the side of the lead bus through sheets of rain and felt the knot in my chest loosen slightly for the first time all night. Children pressed against the windows, staring wide-eyed at military trucks and flashing lights lining the streets. Some looked scared. Others looked excited the way kids sometimes do during disasters because they do not fully understand danger yet. Then I saw Ava. She sat near the middle of the bus wearing her oversized blue astronomy hoodie with her backpack clutched against her chest. Her flashlight flickered weakly beside her seat while rain streaked down the glass between us. The second she recognized me standing beside the convoy vehicles, her shoulders dropped in relief. Cannot explain that feeling properly unless you're a parent. It is like finally breathing after holding your lungs underwater too long. The bus doors hissed open and humid air rushed out carrying the smell of wet fabric, muddy sneakers, and cafeteria food trays. Ava hurried down the steps and wrapped both arms around my waist so hard I nearly lost balance on the slick pavement. Her hoodie was damp from condensation and smelled faintly like school markers and rainwater. "Dad?" she whispered against my jacket. Everybody was crying. I held the back of her head while helicopters circled overhead and flood sirens echoed through the dark subdivision streets. "You are okay now?" I told her quietly. Behind us, Brenda was still trying to salvage control of the situation. She cornered one of the county supervisors beside the flooded guard station, waving soaked HOA paperwork in the air. "These vehicles damaged private infrastructure," she snapped. "The association will be filing emergency claims immediately." The county supervisor actually looked offended by the stupidity of the sentence. Around us, emergency crews were helping children off buses while residents carried blankets and bottled water through ankle-deep rain. One National Guard medic was checking on a little boy with asthma near the clubhouse entrance. Another crew directed traffic away from a collapsed drainage ditch near the tennis courts. And Brenda was worried about brick pavement. Deputy Harris finally stepped toward her holding a waterproof citation folder beneath one arm. Rain dripped steadily from the brim of his sheriff hat while he spoke. "Ma'am, you are being formally documented for obstruction of emergency operations under County Disaster Response Authority." Brenda stared at him in disbelief. "Excuse me." Harris did not raise his voice. "Your refusal to comply delayed child evacuation during an active emergency declaration." The silence after that sentence felt louder than the helicopters. Even the residents standing nearby stopped pretending not to listen. Brenda's face lost color beneath the flashing emergency lights. "You cannot seriously be blaming me for this storm." Harris glanced once toward the soaked buses lined along the roadway. "No, ma'am," he said calmly. "But we are documenting what you did during it." Somewhere behind us, one of the helicopter spotlights swept across the subdivision entrance again, illuminating the broken HOA gates still hanging crooked beside the flooded road like the storm itself had decided the neighborhood was no longer in charge. By 3:30 in the morning, Willow Creek Estates no longer looked like a luxury subdivision. It looked like a disaster zone wearing expensive landscaping. Floodwater covered half the entrance boulevard. Decorative flower beds had dissolved into muddy trenches. One of the stone mailbox clusters near the tennis courts leaned sideways after the drainage culvert underneath it collapsed. The air smelled like wet concrete, diesel fumes, soaked grass, and overheated electrical panels. Helicopters still circled overhead, while portable floodlights turned the rain into glowing silver streaks across the dark streets. The children had all been evacuated safely by then. School buses lined the far side of the neighborhood near the elevated county road where emergency crews handed out blankets and juice boxes beneath temporary shelters. Ava sat inside one of the warming tents wrapped in a gray emergency blanket while talking quietly with her teacher. Every once in a while she glanced over to make sure I was still nearby. I understood that feeling too well. After disasters, people need visual proof the worst part is actually over. Brenda, however, still had not accepted reality. She stormed through puddles toward the temporary county command station set up beside the clubhouse parking lot, her soaked raincoat dragging through muddy water while two exhausted HOA board members struggled to keep up behind her. The clubhouse generator hummed loudly nearby, filling the humid air with the smell of gasoline and hot metal. Emergency crews moved around carrying maps, radios, and flood barrier equipment, while Brenda marched straight into the middle of operations like she still thought this was an HOA budget meeting. "I want the name of whoever authorized destruction of our gate system," she demanded loudly. Nobody stopped working. Honestly, that might have irritated her more than anything else. Sergeant Mercer stood beside a folding command table reviewing flood maps under a portable light while rainwater dripped steadily from the edge of the canopy overhead. He barely looked up. Emergency infrastructure access was authorized under state disaster declaration protocol. Brenda slapped one of her soaked HOA binders onto the table hard enough to splash water across the maps. "This association will pursue legal action immediately." Mercer finally looked at her directly. Calm. Expressionless. "Ma'am, your neighborhood almost became an evacuation bottleneck during an active hazardous material flood event." Brenda opened her mouth to argue again, but another voice interrupted her from behind. "Actually," the county attorney said while stepping beneath the canopy, "the county may be pursuing action first." Even the nearby emergency workers slowed slightly, pretending not to listen while absolutely listening. The county attorney carried a waterproof evidence folder tucked beneath one arm. "Your live stream recordings have already been archived as part of the incident review," she continued, "including repeated refusals to comply with emergency access orders." Brenda's face tightened immediately. "You cannot use social media against residents." The attorney gave a tired smile. Publicly recorded obstruction during a declared disaster tends to become relevant very quickly. One of the HOA board members behind Brenda quietly stepped backward like he suddenly regretted every life decision that brought him there. I almost felt bad for him. Almost. Nearby, a pair of National Guard engineers walked past carrying damaged gate components removed from the entrance system. One of them laughed quietly while reading the decorative brass plaques still attached to the twisted metal frame. "Willow Creek Estates. Luxury. Privacy. Exclusivity. Funny words during a flood evacuation." Then Deputy Harris approached, holding another folder thicker than the first one. "We also received 17 resident statements tonight," he said evenly. "Several homeowners claimed they begged the board to open the gates earlier and were ignored." Brenda turned slowly toward the remaining HOA members behind her. Nobody met her eyes. Not one. Rain hammered the subdivision rooftops while helicopters continued circling overhead, and for the first time all night, Brenda Whitmore finally looked alone. The rain finally started weakening just before dawn, but the damage was already done. Willow Creek Estates sat under emergency flood lighting like a stage after a bad performance. Mud coated the marble entrance signs. Water dripped steadily from bent gate hinges into puddles reflecting rotating red emergency lights. The helicopters were gone now, replaced by the lower mechanical hum of generators and county utility trucks working through the dark streets. Everything smelled soaked. Wet cedar mulch, floodwater, burned wiring, exhaust fumes lingering in humid morning air. Residents stood in clusters near the clubhouse wrapped in blankets and holding paper coffee cups handed out by emergency crews. Nobody talked much anymore. The adrenaline had burned off hours ago, leaving only exhaustion and embarrassment hanging over the subdivision like fog. Brenda Whitmore still stood near the temporary command canopy, clutching her soaked HOA binder against her chest, but the confidence was completely gone now. Her mascara had smeared slightly beneath tired eyes, and rainwater darkened the sleeves of her expensive coat. For the first time since I moved into Willow Creek Estates, she looked like somebody forced to live in the same reality as everybody else. County investigators arrived shortly after 4 in the morning carrying hard cases and portable evidence scanners. They photographed the blocked entrance, archived emergency communications, and collected copies of the live-stream footage Brenda had proudly recorded herself. Watching investigators preserve her own social media videos as evidence felt almost surreal. The woman had documented her own collapse in high definition. Deputy Harris approached her one final time beneath the glow of the floodlights. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "County Emergency Review has officially opened an obstruction inquiry regarding tonight's evacuation delay." Brenda shook her head immediately. "This is political retaliation." Harris did not react. He simply handed her a waterproof information packet. "You are also being instructed not to interfere with any further emergency operations pending investigation." The nearby residents heard every word. You could see it spreading through the crowd instantly. The shift. The moment people stopped seeing Brenda as authority and started seeing her as liability. HOA board members quietly drifted away one by one toward their cars without speaking to her. One older resident actually removed his Willow Creek Estates board badge and dropped it into a puddle beside the curb before walking off into the rain. I will admit that image stayed with me. Nearby, emergency crews finally reopened the Northern County route, while buses prepared to transport the remaining students toward temporary shelters outside the flood zone. Ava sat beside me on the tailgate of my county SUV wrapped in a blanket while eating stale emergency crackers like they were gourmet food. Kids are resilient that way. Her flashlight still clipped to her hoodie blinked weakly every few seconds because the batteries were nearly dead. "Is the scary part over?" she asked quietly. I looked toward the broken HOA entrance where National Guard engineers were removing the last sections of twisted gate hardware. Dawn light slowly crept across the flooded streets behind them, turning the standing water pale silver. "Yeah," I told her. "The scary part is over." And for the kids, it was. But not for Brenda. Around sunrise, the county attorney held a short emergency briefing near the clubhouse steps, while local news crews filmed from beneath umbrellas. Flood recovery. Evacuation success. Infrastructure damage. Then came the final announcement. Effective immediately, Willow Creek Estates emergency corridor access would become permanently state-controlled during disaster events moving forward. No HOA override authority. No private gate restrictions. No board approval process. The entrance Brenda spent years protecting no longer belonged entirely to the HOA during emergencies. Honestly, that punishment fit better than any fine ever could. Brenda stood completely silent while reporters scribbled notes and cameras rolled. The same gates she treated like symbols of power had become permanent reminders of public failure. As the sun finally pushed through the storm clouds, its light hit the flooded entrance just right, reflecting off the broken iron gates still hanging crooked beside the road. And standing there with mud on her shoes and cameras pointed at her from every direction, Brenda Whitmore finally learned something disasters teach better than courts ever can. Real authority does not scream behind locked gates. Real authority shows up when people need help. 3 months later, you could still see the outline of the old gates if you knew where to look. The county removed the damaged iron entrance completely during flood recovery and replaced it with a reinforced emergency access corridor painted bright yellow along the curb line. No decorative stone barriers. No keypad checkpoints. No polished brass signs about exclusivity. Just a simple reflective marker that read State Emergency Route Authorized Access Required at all times. Every morning when I drove Ava to school, we passed that sign on the way out of the neighborhood. And every single time, somebody slowed down to stare at it. Willow Creek Estates never really recovered from that night. The flood damage got repaired eventually. The streets dried out. Landscapers replaced dead shrubs and pressure-washed mud off sidewalks. The clubhouse reopened after electrical crews rewired the lower generator room. But the atmosphere changed permanently. The neighborhood felt quieter after the storm. Less arrogant somehow. Like everybody finally realized expensive houses and HOA bylaws do not mean much when children are stranded in rising water. The investigation moved faster than most people expected. Turns out delaying a county evacuation involving school buses creates a very large paper trail. Emergency dispatch recordings. Sheriff reports. Archived livestream footage. Resident statements. Even the local news stations kept replaying clips of Brenda standing in front of those locked gates while helicopters circled overhead. Nobody edited the footage dramatically either. They did not need to. Reality already looked unbelievable enough. Several HOA board members resigned within 2 weeks. One family quietly sold their house before the county hearings even finished. Another resident started a petition to dissolve the entire homeowners association completely. Last I heard, it had over 80% neighborhood support. Funny how quickly people stop loving strict community control once they watch it nearly trap their own children during a flood. As for Brenda Whitmore, she disappeared from public life almost overnight. No more neighborhood patrols. No more angry emails about mailbox colors. No more standing at the entrance holding a clipboard like she owned the world behind those gates. The county restricted her from participating in emergency coordination matters pending final review, and civil lawsuits from several parents followed shortly after that. I saw her exactly one more time. About a month after the flood, I stopped at the neighborhood mailbox cluster on a humid Saturday morning. The air smelled like fresh-cut grass and wet pavement from overnight sprinklers. Cicadas buzzed loudly from the oak trees overhead, while sunlight reflected off puddles still trapped near the repaired drainage ditch. Brenda stood beside the mailboxes holding a small cardboard box against her chest. No makeup, no expensive raincoat, no entourage of HOA supporters behind her. Just one tired woman avoiding eye contact with everyone around her. She looked up briefly when she recognized me. For a second, neither of us said anything. Then her eyes drifted toward the new emergency route marker installed near the entrance road behind me. They never should have made that permanent, she muttered quietly. I looked toward the bright yellow sign, standing where her gates used to be. County workers had planted fresh cedar posts around it the week before. Strong ones this time. Built to stay. Kids got home safe, I said. That seems permanent enough to matter. She did not answer after that. Just climbed into her Lexus and drove away slowly without looking back at the neighborhood she used to rule. Ava still talks about the helicopters sometimes when storms roll through at night. She says they sounded like giants walking across the sky. Every time heavy rain hits our windows now, she checks the weather app beside me on the couch while wrapped in that same astronomy hoodie from the evacuation. But she is not scared anymore, because she learned something important that night. Real safety does not come from gates. It comes from people willing to open them when it matters most. And every time I pass that emergency route sign standing where Willow Creek Estates once tried to block the world out, I remember the sound those locked gates made when they finally opened. Not loud, not dramatic, just inevitable.